Don't watch this service. Don't watch it unless you're prepared to be moved, prepared to be stirred and stirred up. Don't watch it if you're not ready to make some changes in your life and the lives of others. Especially don't watch it if you aren't prepared for good news and things to look forward to. That's all I can say about that for now. In the meantime, welcome to First Jefferson Unitarian Universalist Church in Fort Worth, Texas, on this Sunday morning before Martin Luther King Jr. Day. My name is Annie Foerster, and I'm proud to be minister of this congregation. No, I'm more than proud. I'm jazzed. I'm excited. I'm ready to give it all away, but there is an order to things. There is an order of service to our worship. Let me just say I plan to honor Martin Luther King Day this morning by looking at his dream and at his legacy as we see it today. But more importantly, I want to talk about what happens next, what our legacy might be, can be, will be. For now, let us begin our morning worship with music. Let us wake up, not just from the Sunday morning exhaustion, from the wish for a few more drowsy minutes in bed. Let us wake up to this world we live in, to its beauty and wonder, and also to its tragedy and pain. We must wake up to this reality that not all in our world have what we do, however much or little that is. We must wake up to the idea that our wholeness, our lives, are only as complete as the lives of those around us, of those we are inextricably tied to in a great web of mutuality, of which all of us are a part. We must stay woke, in the words of our friends and colleagues involved in Black Lives Matter, working every day for racial justice in our country. Let us wake up. Let us stay awake. Let us stay woke. And now in this time and place, let us worship together. Our opening hymn this morning is titled Perfect Singer, and our hymn leader this morning is Reneel Baker.
Perfect singer, songs of earth, rise on every field and hearth. Let our voices sound again, ancient songs of joy and pain. rise. Kindle hope with each sunrise.
Always delighted to learn about long-distance partnerships. I look at this hymn in our hymn book and I realize the music was written by a man who was born in 1881, Bela Bartok. And the words were written by a Unitarian minister who was born in 1935 and sung and played this morning by much younger gentlemen. We light our chalice this morning, and as we do so, let us look outward to the world to experience its joys, but more importantly, to understand its sufferings. Then let us look inward to see what part we play in expanding those celebrations of joy, but more importantly, in alleviating those sufferings. Ours is a covenant of sharing. Let none go unnoticed, unheard, or unblessed. This is our second week of celebrating Chalaka, a Unitarian Universalist holy day honoring our principles. And with us today is Thomas Earthman, a staff member at this church, who will share his interpretation of our second principle. Thomas?
We are celebrating this uniquely Unitarian Universalist holiday by honoring one of our 7 principles each week. My name is Thomas Earthman, and I am your lifespan religious educator. I've chosen principle number 2. One of the goals of Unitarian Universalism as a religious movement is to make the world a better place for the largest number of people possible. Our second principle that our congregation committed to as a member of the UUA is that we will affirm and promote the goal of justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. I've been asked to give you my thoughts on our second principle, and it feels like an extra layer of responsibility that the day we cover it falls on the weekend we celebrate the life and legacy of Dr. King. Advancing the mission of making things better for the largest number of people will require that we learn from as many people as possible all the different ways in which one can be human. Each of us can only experience a small fraction of that. But by listening and working together with others from diverse backgrounds, we can broaden our understanding and improve our efforts. We cannot create justice without collecting the stories of injustice from around the world. Likewise, compassion requires that we hear the needs of people and how they think those needs should be addressed, allowing them to have a say in their own future. But that gets into another principle altogether. Justice must be tempered with compassion, or we risk retaliation, getting even, instead of restoration, which is making things whole and good again. Compassion must be aligned with equity, or we risk becoming patronizing instead of kind. We must seek equality of opportunity by giving people what they need to succeed, and we need to try to do that even when they've wronged other people. We should work to reconcile and heal people who've lashed out, but we can't make that the responsibility of the people who've been wronged. That's why part of the mission has to be making this a cultural burden that we share as a community, creating institutions and systems that rehabilitate and encourage people to do better in the future. Admittedly, equality may feel like a step back to some people who are used to privilege and power. I have compassion for those people, but I recognize that if the powerful are unwilling to share their power, they've become an obstacle rather than teammates. That doesn't mean we can't still learn from them, and I'll never give up hope that everyone can be shown the value of beloved community. Reconciliation should always be the goal where it's an option. This is one of the hardest principles to write or talk about, not because it's hard to understand or explain without using big words, but because it's really hard to live into fully. Anger will always be at odds with compassion. Fear will always be opposed to equity. The idea that justice needs to be compassionate is really hard to remember when you're the one seeking justice. And so we do these things as a community so that we can build them into institutions in the broader world with the goal of creating beloved community, because these things are going to take a lot more work than any of us could do alone. How do you celebrate being a Unitarian Universalist? Happy Chalaka.
Thank you, Thomas. And that's a good question. How do you celebrate our second principle? Think about it while you join me in repeating our covenant. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest of truth is our sacrament, and service is our prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge and freedom, to serve others in community to the end that all souls shall grow into harmony with creation. Thus do we covenant with one another. I wonder, is there a person in the world who hasn't heard of Martin Luther King Jr.? Who doesn't recognize the words, "I have a dream"? I want to talk a bit today about how he came to be part of our lives, where we are today, and what comes next. So I'd like you to consider these questions. What took us so long to get where we are? And what can we do about it today? And while you're thinking, let's watch the story for all ages titled "I Am Enough" by Grace Byers.
Titled "I'm Enough," written by Grace Byers. Like the sun, I'm here to shine. Like the voice, I'm here to sing. Like the bird, I'm here to fly and soar high over everything. Like the trees, I'm here to grow. Like the mountains, here to stand. Like the champ, I'm here to fight. Like the heart, I'm here to love. Like a ladder, here to climb, and like the air, to rise above. Like the wind, I'm here to push. Like a rope, I'm here to pull. Like the rain, I'm here to pour and drip and fall until I'm full. Like the moon, I'm here to dream. Like the student, here to learn. Like the water, here to swill. Like the fire, here to burn. Like the winner, I'm here to win. And if I don't get up again, I know that I may sometimes cry, but even then, I'm here to try. I'm not meant to be like you, and you're not meant to be like me. Sometimes we will get along, and sometimes we will disagree. I know that we don't look the same. Our skin, our eyes, our hair, our frame. But that does not dictate our worth. We both have places here on earth. And in the end, we're right here to live a life of love, not fear. To help each other when it's tough. To say together, I am enough. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. I hope you enjoyed our book. Thank you.
Isn't that a lovely story? I'm happy to tell you that Grace Byers has generously put many of her stories on YouTube if you want to see more of what she has written. Delightful stories like "I Am Enough." My first response goes like this. This nation was founded on genocide and slavery. There's no easy way to look at it. Our forefathers and our foremothers, looking for a place they could be free from their own trials and injustices, found a land of wide open spaces and vast potential, and they moved in. But they didn't say, "Mother, may I?" They didn't say, "Can we share?" They just took the land, took it for granted, because the people living on it didn't wear the same kind of garments they wore, nor have the same complexions. Simple as that. Then they compounded their insensitivity and imported more people who wore strange-looking clothes and had even darker complexions and made them slaves. And then, as if they hadn't already created two sins against humanity, they turned around, declared the land a new nation, founded on democracy with all citizens having equal voice and equal rights. Well, almost all citizens. For almost 5 centuries, we have closed our eyes to the first 2 acts and celebrated the third. We've had to polish that democracy story up a bit, include a few more people who were left out of the first draft, and redefine the word equal to mean everyone except those who wear strange-looking clothes and have dark complexions. And don't forget that for a long time, dresses were considered strange-looking clothes. But that's another story to talk about another day. This nation prospered, mostly because the land was rich and the labor was cheap. Then one day, somewhere, a man named Abraham Lincoln, fearful that this democracy, this ability to make up your own mind and choose, might split the Union apart. And he said, we have to end this slavery thing or agree on it. You know, he didn't really care how that question was settled so long as the United States remained united. So we went to war, and the anti-slave side won, sort of. The slaves were let out of their contracts, but not out of the invisible fences that separated them from the rest of the population, fences determined by their complexions. Now, you know I'm not a historian, I'm a storyteller. And when I know you know the story, I tend to skip over parts of it like I'm going to do now. There were characters along the way down that tunnel of time who changed the plot of the story a little, some who tried to. Characters like Stephen Douglas, Sojourner Truth, John Brown, now there was a mixed-up dude, and James Reeb. Fill in the parts of history you know yourself. I need to get us down to Martin Luther King Jr. in the time I have left this morning. The thing about Martin Luther King was he didn't rely on the abolitionists in his own country. He went looking for inspiration anywhere he could find it. He found it in his Bible. He found it in his Baptist faith, where his father and his grandfather had both been ministers before him. And he found it, of all places, in India, in a little man called Mahatma Gandhi. This is why I like storytelling better than history. You get to show those spider webs of influence and connection. History moves by action, yes, but it also moves by influence. So let's look at Gandhi. Gandhi was born in 1892 in India, and you guessed it, he wore strange-looking clothes and had a dark complexion. And he had troubles that King could relate to, being kicked out of schools and out of countries, being downgraded to lower positions by humiliating laws, being raised in a very strict religion. He was a Hindu who took for granted things like ahimsa, non-injury to all living beings, or vegetarianism, fasting for self-purification, and mutual tolerance between adherents of various creeds and sects. In spite of all the things held against him, he managed to create a movement of social justice that rivaled the richest imagination. It was based on 2 Sanskrit words found in the Bhagavad Gita, this holy scripture. The first word was aparigraha, non-possession, which implies that people have to jettison the material goods that cramp the life of the spirit and to shake off the bonds of money and property. The other word was samabhava, equitability, which enjoins people to remain unruffled by pain or pleasure, victory or defeat, and to work without hope of success or fear of failure. King saw that Gandhi's success was also based on the philosophy of passive resistance, of nonviolent protest, meeting aggression with peace. And he listened to the words that Gandhi used and adapted them to fit his own melodic style of preaching about freedom for African Americans. Here's what Gandhi said: happiness is when what you think, what you say, and what you do are in harmony. He said an eye for an eye only ends up making the whole world blind. He said where there is love, there is life. He said there is no God higher than truth. He said in a gentle way you can shake the world. And he said the future depends on what we do in the present. Action expresses priorities. If you don't ask, you don't get it. Earth provides enough to satisfy every man's needs, but not every man's greed. And soon King had his own following. Soon he was the leader of a new social justice movement, part of the civil rights movement, part of the move forward, part of finally freeing the slaves, we thought. And then he met the same end as Gandhi. He was assassinated. Oh, he got a day on the calendar. And then, well, history moves slowly, like a glacier. It's only in a book or in a sermon where you can skip over the dull and dusty parts, the 50 years of slumber and dreaming parts that are connections. It isn't that nothing happened after 1968. It's just that nothing much changed. I'll pick up the story in my next response. But for now, a generosity report. When the pandemic began last year, we applied for one of the federal loans called the Payroll Protection Program to help us pay our staff if money was not coming in as we might hope. We got a notice this week from our bank that the loan has been forgiven, as was promised if we used it to pay our staff, and that we are in a good place financially because of the help of our federal government. So I acknowledge with gratitude a federal program much appreciated by this small congregation. I have a reading this morning titled Your Life Matters by Kenny Wiley. And he wrote, most of us Unitarian Universalists are here because we felt welcome here at last. Some of us were too agnostic somewhere else. Some of us weren't vindictive enough somewhere else. We were too working class somewhere else. We were too lesbian somewhere else. We were too nerdy somewhere else, too introverted somewhere else, too gay married somewhere else. Many of us are here because this faith and the people in it affirmed, you may not be perfect, but your life matters just the same. And that's what's on the line now. Through racism and posthumous victim blaming, through silence and bullets and indifference and vilification, Black people are being told that our lives do not matter, or that they matter only conditionally. But Black lives matter if we are educated, if we are respectful, and sometimes not even then, do our lives matter. Right now, we as Unitarian Universalists are being called to act. We are being called by our ancestors, those who demanded that we help end slavery, that we fight for suffrage, that we join the struggle to end Jim Crow, that we listen to and honor Black power. Lydia Marie Child and William Lloyd Garrison are calling us. Lucy Stone is calling us. Fannie B. Williams and Frances Ellen Harper are calling us. James Reeb is calling us. Viola Liuzzo is calling us. Guided by that enduring, unfulfilled promise of the belief in the inherent worth and dignity of every person, ours is a faith that has said or worked to say to those who have been marginalized, you are a woman and your life matters. You are a gay or lesbian and your life matters. You are transgender and your life matters. You are bisexual and your life matters. You have a disability, and your life matters. You were not loved as a child, and your life matters. You struggle with depression, and your life matters. Right now, we are being called by our ancestors, by our principals, by young black activists across the country to promote and affirm you are young and black and your life matters. You stole something and your life matters. I have been taught to fear you and your life matters. The police are releasing your criminal record and your life matters. They're calling you a thug and your life matters. Our ancestors, principals, and fellow humans are calling on us to promote, affirm with deeds and words, Black lives matter. We are coming to a day when people will not be judged consciously or unconsciously on the basis of their race. I believe that day is possible too, but that it will take a great deal of work to get there. And that work begins by listening to one another and listening especially to the voices of those who have the least power in society. If nothing else is clear from the past few weeks, it is painfully evident that a great many people do not believe that they are treated fairly. Healing begins by listening to those voices and those stories. And how do we listen to these stories? Well, our next hymn suggests a number of ways. Guide my feet. Reneel?
Guide my feet while I run this race. Guide my feet while I run this race. Guide my feet while I run this race. For I don't want to run this race in vain, race in vain. Hold my hand while I run this race. Hold my hand while I run this race. Hold my hand while I run this race. For I don't want to run this race in vain, race in vain. Stand by me while I run this race. Stand by me while I run this race. Stand by me while I run this race. For I don't want to run this race in vain, race in vain. Search my heart while I run this race. Search my heart while I run this race. Search my heart while I run this race. For I don't want to run this race in vain, race in vain.
Does that give you some ideas of what work is ahead of us, that there's work for all of us to do? Listen again to these words. Guide my feet. Hold my hand. Stand by me. Search my heart. We can all use that kind of fellowship. Let me go back to Martin Luther King for a while. He said many profound things before he died, not just, I have a dream. Here are just a few you may have forgotten in the intervening 50-some years. He said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. He said, darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. He said, a riot is the language of the unheard. He said, the time is always right to do what is right. And he said, in the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. There are warnings in those words, but there is hope. At 52 years, as I said, things happened. A small thing happened in 2013 that turned into a bigger thing, and then a bigger thing that created backlash. But backlash is what it takes sometimes for things to move forward. 2013, that's when the Black Lives Matter movement began, following the death of Trayvon Martin, an African-American teenager who was shot while walking to a family friend's house, and the subsequent acquittal of George Zimmerman, the man who shot him. It was co-founded by 3 black women, Alicia Garza, Patrisse Cullors, and Opal Tometi, as a response to this and other police killings of black people. The phrase Black Lives Matter was first used in a Facebook post by Garza after Zimmerman was found not guilty, and was the inspiration for the entire campaign. Cullors recognized the power of Garza's words, and she created the hashtag Black Lives Matter, and the campaign was born. The movement quickly gathered followers, with interest and momentum spiking every time a black person was killed as a result of an altercation with white police. Eric Garner from a chokehold that went awry when he was being arrested, Michael Brown by a gunshot wound in 2014, Walter Scott, Freddie Gray, Megan Hockaday in 2015. Also in 2015, 21 transgender people were killed, and 13 of these victims were black. Coincidence? No way. The following year, Deborah Danner and Alton Sterling were slain. After each of these deaths, Black Lives Matter movement organized peaceful protest. Black Lives Matter banners began to sprout everywhere. They became an adornment on the sides of many Unitarian Universalist churches. And over they were vandalized and torn down by protesters who resented the implications, and over they were replaced. Here at First Jefferson, to this day, when the church is open as a voting place, there is a man who protests our having a sign above our door that reads Black Lives Matter. He claims it's an illegal political message, and every year he is told by police who are called in that it isn't. It is a statement of sympathy, of empathy, with an ethical movement. The Black Lives Matter movement inspired black sports stars to kneel at the opening of games. In 2017, the movement put on its first art exhibition featuring the work of more than 30 black artists. Protests followed, not only killings, but the acquittals and not guilty verdicts of the police officers who killed them. In an interview with ABC News, marking 5 years of Black Lives Matter, Cullors explained the impact the organization had had on other causes. She said, Black Lives Matter has popularized civil disobedience again, and the need to put our bodies on the line with things like the Women's March and Me Too and March for Our Lives. All of these movements, their foundations are in Black Lives Matter. By May 1st, 2018, a study found that the hashtag Black Lives Matter had been used nearly 30 million times on Twitter since the first instance in 2013. But the killings continued. Grecario Mack, Kenneth Ross Jr. Then in 2020, George Floyd was murdered in Minneapolis when a white police officer was videotaped kneeling on his neck. And something shifted. The Black Lives Matter protests began to be held all over the world. Counter-protesters complaining that all lives matter started to pop up. Well, of course they do, was the response. That's exactly what we're talking about. You just didn't include us before, and now we're including ourselves. This isn't just history. This is history in the making. This is happening now. The next question is, what happens next? And who is responsible for it happening? But before we look at that, let's take time to center on this community of love with our communion of names and milestones, sharing the stories of the happinesses and the complaints of those of our beloved community. I learned this week that Jude and Bernie Olson lost their dog Mango. He was their first rescue dog along with his sister Lily and a beloved family member for many years. We feel your pain, and we will keep you in our minds and our hearts. Let us take a moment to think about the stories that live in this community, the ones that are spoken aloud, the ones that are whispered from one person to the next or told on Facebook or Twitter, and maybe not shared with the whole congregation, but still are part of this community, live in this community, live in each of us, in you. Close your eyes, if you will. Take a deep breath. Let us take a moment of silence to consider the lives that matter in our lives. And then we will ask our pianist Misha Beresnev to play us some music to continue our meditation. Thank you, Misha. Here's the part I'm excited about. Here's the answer to that question I posed a few minutes ago. Here's the part that includes you. Yes, you. I gave you an out, but you stuck with me this far. Don't quit me now. Just let me back up a bit. In 2017, the Unitarian Universalist Association chartered a study on institutional change that would support long-term cultural changes, changes that would redeem the promise and the ideals of Unitarian Universalism. The Commission on Institutional Change, shorted to COIC, was formed and instructed to conduct an audit of the power structures within the organization and to analyze any systemic racism and white supremacy cultures within this denomination and the Association of Churches. Their goals included grounding its work in theological reflection. It included overseeing an audit of racism within the Unitarian Universalist Association practices and policies. It included collecting stories of those who have been targets of harm or aggression because of racism. It included examining and documenting critical events and practices at all levels of the association, congregations, related ministries as special areas for redress and restorative justice. And it included illuminating the expectations placed on religious professionals who are Black, Indigenous, and people of color in the transformation of our faith, identifying promising practices for recruitment, retention, and formation of religious leadership that spans the spectrum of race, class, and age, and reflects an inclusive ecclesiology. Isn't that a lovely word, ecclesiology? That's a study of the church, Unitarian Universalist churches in particular, our church. The Commission's report is out. It's called Widening the Circle of Concern. And here is some of what it says. It says, transformation is needed at all levels of our association to abandon dysfunctional cultural expressions of our theology and polity. It says the covenants that bind us together both within our own faith and to our partners in the world are frayed and broken by the domination of white supremacy culture among us. And here's what I'm so excited about, what I started out to tell you. We are going to do some ecclesiology right here at First Jefferson Unitarian Universalist Church. Starting next month, we are going to start widening the circle of concern right here until it begins to extend out into the world beyond our walls. Now, this isn't easy work to do. I'll tell you why. The patterns and habits of white supremacy culture are often unacknowledged, unrecognized, or openly denied. But when we understand how these patterns and habits affect those who hold power, and especially those who are harmed by them, then we also come to understand that we can't dismantle systems of oppressive behavior without being part of the process, without forming partnerships with people on both sides of it. The Adult Religious Exploration Council is hosting this grand experiment, which will be both education and social justice work. It will be done with videos and readings, which you will take it upon yourself to watch or read, and then we will join in virtual meetings to discuss what we are learning and how we can apply it to ourselves, our church, and our communities. They are offering this opportunity to every member, friend, and casual acquaintance of this church. They are offering it. I am insisting on it. Well, as much as I can insist and direct how you spend your time. But I'm expecting there to be good, no better than good attendance. And I'll tell you why. As it says in the introduction to the study guide, this is not simply an academic exploration into the current state of the prevalence of white supremacy culture. We must understand that as a living tradition, our faith's very survival depends on its relevance, and relevance depends on accepting and addressing the truth of what is going on around us. What is going on is graphically displayed on your television screens every day, shouted from your radios and podcasts, and talked about in your social circles. Last week, for instance, a march on Washington that included breaking into the Capitol building and disrupting and threatening Congress is what everyone is talking about. And that was white supremacy in action in its most violent and brutish form. Is it true that the Capitol Police did not call for help because the protesters were white? I don't know. But if it's true, it's compounding of the crime. But here's what's going to happen if we don't take up this challenge immediately, before the anger and the danger fade from our minds. You and I are going to say to ourselves, if those people were white supremacists, then I'm not one. I'm not part of that movement, and nothing will change. Because if we don't do something, then we are part of letting the institutions of white supremacy continue to exist. Here is the hierarchy of social justice work as we have inherited it in our faith and the principles which support it. First, we must educate ourselves. A free and responsible search for truth and meaning. And then we must take action. The goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. Those are just two of our principles. Now, the lower rungs of this hierarchy are donate and sign a petition, but the time is long past for that. Education and action are required now. Nothing less will do. Nothing less is acceptable. I'm going to end the service this morning by asking more questions, even harder questions than I asked in the beginning. Here's one. Is this a place you come to, belong to, in order to discuss what's wrong with other religions and other persons' beliefs? Or is this a place you attend to covenant with others, to imagine and create a better world, a kinder world, a world worth fighting for? There are right and wrong answers to these questions. Think hard, and then join us. More information will be following in the coming weeks. Look for it in your emails. Look for it on your Sunday morning broadcasts. And in the meantime, join with me in this idea. Let this be a house of peace, as Reneel sings us out of this service.
Let this be a house of peace, of nature and humanity, of sorrow and elation. Let this be our house, a haven for the healing, an open room for question and our inspiration. Let this be a house of peace. Let this be our house of peace. Let this be a house of peace. Let this be a house of freedom, guardian of dignity and worth held deep inside us. Let this be our house, a platform for the free voice, where all our sacred differences here shall not divide us. Let this be a house of peace. Let this be a house of peace. Let this be a house of peace. Let this be a house, seek truth scientists and mystics abide in atmosphere. Let this be our house, a house of our creation, where works of arts and melodies consecrate the atmosphere. Let this be a house of peace. Let this be a house of peace. Let this be a house of peace. Let this be a house of prophecy. May vision for our children be our common theme. Let this be our house, a myth and lore and legend, our trove of ancient story and cradle of tender dreams. Let this be a house of peace. Let this be our house of peace. Let this be a house of peace. Let this be our house of peace. Let this be a house of peace. Let this be our house of peace. Let this be our house of peace. Let this be our house of peace.
A chalice has burned this morning as a call to peace, as a call to freedom. Take it in your hearts. It is an invitation to do something. Some words are worth repeating. Happiness is when what you think, what you say, and what you do are in harmony. May the time is always right to do what is right. In the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. Let these words make a difference in all our lives. Misha.